Most organizations today are fairly diverse in the sense that they have good representation of women, racialized minorities, as well as newer immigrants that come into the country. But what sets an inclusive organization apart from one that is less inclusive, for instance, would be about 4 or 5 different points. The first, of course, would be what we refer to as structural integration. So by structural integration, I do mean that we have good representation of underrepresented groups at all levels of the organization. The second part, of course, has to do with functions. We know organizations tend to hire people into different functional areas. Oftentimes, you might find that in IT, for instance, or in the accountant's office, there tend to be more of a representation of certain racialized groups. The third, of course, is within the work group themselves, right? So within work groups, you sometimes find that people do segregate themselves based on certain cultural backgrounds or history. The second part for me would be the informal integration aspect. I always say you can legislate people to act in a certain way during office hours, you can legislate numbers, but it's hard to regulate people's behaviors after hours, right? So we're talking about what people do after work hours, the informal social networks, inviting people out for lunches or inviting them to your home for dinner, going to sports games or even a golf game. Why are those things important? For minority group members to feel truly included, they have to experience 3 things. One is access to information. You only get those when you are sort of socializing after hours. The second part, of course, would be access to influence. And the third is perceived insider status. So as you can imagine, those things don't come off formal policies, formal events, but rather a lot of times you get your information, you influence each other, and you feel like you're part of an insider or part of the insider group when you are at this informal events, right? The third aspect for me would be how minority and majority group members perceive or identify with the organization they work for. The fourth and the last point would be on intergroup conflict. When you look at majority and minority groups, would the majority group be resentful towards some of the efforts to sort of promote diversity and inclusion in the organization? So when intergroup conflict is minimized, what you then get would be people are much more willing to work with each other. In order for us to break down stereotypes and change our mindset about those who are different, we need to have repeated interactions, and those interactions need to be positive. In other words, just being exposed to someone who's culturally different isn't necessarily going to change our negative stereotypes towards a particular group. Now, when we talk about training, it generally has a negative connotation. It's either remedial or punishment, right? So I'm being asked to go to sensitivity training. I'm being asked to go to attend implicit bias training. So what you end up getting would be a lot of people feel like, I'm not racist and I have no biases towards other people. CEOs do play 2 really critical roles when it comes to EDII. The first, of course, is what I refer to as symbolic, in the sense that we want CEOs to be seen as championing EDII. We have received the very top level endorsement, and that sends a really strong signal to organizational members. The other role that CEOs play would be what I refer to as a substantive role. So it's good to have the CEOs sort of be the champion, but we also need CEOs to devote resources, time, as well as commitment. One of the ways in which CEOs can truly hold their executive team accountable is to tie executive compensation to these goals, both diversity and inclusion goals. Most executives tend to prioritize profit maximization, gaining market share at the expense of the EDII goals. So when you tie executive comp to EDII goals, most executives would actually think, well, I do need to have greater representation, but more importantly, creating a climate, because it's how employees perceive whether the climate is actually inclusive or not. There are a couple of ways or things that organizations could do to increase the representation of women and racialized minorities into leadership roles. The first, of course, is creating a diverse and deep pipeline of women and racialized minorities, right? By that I mean a critical mass so that we normalize having women and racialized minorities in leadership roles. It also removes the tokenism and the stigma that's often associated with EDII programs. A second way in which organizations could increase the number of women and racialized minorities, especially in leadership roles, is to define excellence and to change the whole principle of meritocracy. At the moment, meritocracy is constructed by a very self-select group of people who are already successful, and that is the only definition of excellence and success. We have now seen that the increasing number of different successful leadership types. The whole notion of, what's a successful leader, what is a good leader, needs to change. So by changing the definition of excellence and revisiting what meritocracy looks like, we can actually improve the diversity at the leadership level.